We are back on Inside Politics today. Our guest is Dr. Ken Paulson from Middle Tennessee State University and the Free Speech Center there. Also, he's the former president of the Freedom of the First Amendment Center on a national basis. Ken, you talked about this upsurge in people believing after 9/11 that the First Amendment goes too far. Is that continued? That's been 20 years ago now. Right. Is it still 50%?
No, it came down every single year.
This is still coming down.
I think it's back to 20% now, back to where it was. And that illustrates a really important principle. Fear can paralyze freedom. If we're frightened as a nation, we tend to lose sight of civil liberties. And we would have seen this, you would have seen this in the Red Scare, for example. Where people's careers ended because of fear of communism.
We also have something today that our founding fathers probably would have been bewildered and amazed at, and that's the social media phenomenon. What impact does that have on people's feelings about the First Amendment? Because you can do things and say things on social media that you'll think that's exactly what the truth is based on what you see, but your eyes are not telling you the right thing.
You know, the research we've done doesn't show a significant change. People see the internet as free speech, and that has not really moved the needle very much at all.
The First Amendment's been around since the 1790s, but the First Amendment Center and now your group, this Free Speech Center at MTSU, are new phenomenons. Why has it taken so long for an effort to defend these very basic rights that most people expect to have?
Well, there's a couple things. There's not a natural constituency for the First Amendment. We've talked about the Second Amendment a couple of times. The National Rifle Association represents gun manufacturers, and they are happy to pour money into an institution that will protect what they view as a free sale.
You've got the national media to protect that portion of it. You've got religious groups who would like to keep certainly freedom of religion. You've got some for that. For petition and assembly, I can understand that, but there never was a group to do it until just very recently, and the group that started here still has had and continues to have quite a Nashville connection.
Right. Well, what I would say is that you would think that would be true. There would be these organizations that would fund First Amendment research or defense, but in truth, the news media have not been terrific on this. They do very well on freedom of the press, but what you find in the First Amendment is that there are constituencies for individual rights within the First Amendment. Yes, religious groups care deeply about freedom of religion, but some are hostile towards freedom of press. Yes, the entertainment industry cares.
And maybe speech, depending on what the speech is.
Exactly. It is not a unifying first, it unifies the country in my view, but it's not like there's one group that's underwriting First Amendment work.
Is some of the ambivalence on all this the fact that maybe along with the Second Amendment, the First Amendment has been perhaps, for its various aspects, very controversial and litigated quite a bit, and much in the news, but always usually a lot of cases in controversy?
Yeah. It's interesting, the First Amendment didn't apply to the states until 1925, so this is very much a creature of the past century.
Was the Supreme Court ruling in 25 that made that happen?
Getlow, yeah, case New York versus Getlow. And that extended the First Amendment to the states. But the point is, there was no First Amendment law or litigation between the birth of the nation and really Getlow, because states could make their own rules. So there's virtually nothing happening in that period. But then you have this decision, 1925, and by the same time you have the invention of radio, then television, and all this technology. So it just stirred the pot. The reason people are sometimes hesitant to support the First Amendment wholeheartedly is that they cannot fathom how hateful speech can exist under the law, how the KKK is allowed to march down Main Street. The First Amendment, the visibility, the highly visibility cases are the ones that make the hardest law.
There was an institution in Washington, the museum, where people could go and at least learn about part of the First Amendment in terms of maybe in part free speech, but mostly freedom of the press. It closed at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Is that a result of people not caring as much about free speech or freedom of the press as maybe they should, or are there just too many museums in Washington?
There's a whole array of options you've given me. So just to recap quickly, the museum was launched in the late 90s in Arlington, Virginia, then moved across the river, built this massive, massive museum that really was a history museum that told the story of history through the news media. And so you had historic newspapers and historic broadcasts and artifacts and all kinds of very cool things. Incredibly well received. Now, I was president of the museum in the aughts, and the goal of that museum was simply to have people walk in that door, and there's a giant First Amendment on the wall outside, and walk out knowing more about the First Amendment than when they walked in. And conceptually it worked great, but financially it didn't. And here's why. When it was built, they raised $100 million before it opened, and the donors were major media companies. Well, look what happened in the economy of the media in the aughts. So really what happened is they raised more money before they built it, and they were able to raise after they built it. All the news companies struggled. They're laying people off. And then there was no one to underwrite the museum. And you couldn't make it up in admission fees in a city in which great museums are free.
Ken Paulson's our guest on Inside Politics. He's from MTSU. He now heads up the Free Speech Center at Middle Tennessee State. Back to continue our conversation with him about the First Amendment after you watch these messages.